These notes are going to have you solving for a specific variable. Your problems will be full of either all letters or very few numbers and a lot of letters, and you will be asked to get the one letter that they request by itself. So this will require your ability to solve equations in a way that you haven't quite seen before. But if you're fluent with the process, it should be okay, and the work should come out in the way you want it to. A lot of these are going to actually be formulas that we're solving for a specific letter, and what a formula is an algebraic equation that relates two or more real life quantities. Okay, and a lot of these have things that you are familiar with because they are real life events that we are aware of on our daily lives. But then some of the formulas are just formulas with letters and numbers that have no meaning at all, but they're still an equation. All right, so I'm going to start you off basic and with a pretty easy one, and then we'll build on it and make it a little harder. All right, the formula A equals BH, right, which is actually the formula for area of a parallelogram, if you remember that from your pre-algebra days. Right, but we are going to take that formula, and right now it's solved for the A. We want to solve it for the H. So the way that I ask you to do this to make it a little easier is to take and circle the letter that you want to solve for, and that shows you that that one has to stay. Everything else connected to it has to go. So if you know this, the B is attached to the H, it's through multiplication. So in order to undo multiplication, we want to divide. We divide both sides by B and then cancel the B's out. And you'll notice that your H is now by itself. So you rewrite your answer to say H equals capital A divided by B. Right? And you do have to use the capital letters and the lowercase letters as they are presented in the formula. You can't change them. Okay, so that problem has been solved for the H, and it's done. Right? Notice it had no numbers in it. It was just a matter of manipulating the variables based on using your equation knowledge. Right, so let's take a look at another one. If I have I equals PRT, right, this is the simple interest formula that you may recognize. Right? We want to solve this formula not for the I like it already is, but for the letter R. So take and circle the letter you want to stay and look at what's attached to it and decide how you want to get rid of it. The P, the R, and the T are all being held together by multiplication. So if I want to divide them up, I want to use division to get rid of the letters I don't want. And I can get rid of as many letters at a time as I want to, because they're just all going to cancel out. So if I want the P to go away, I'm going to divide by P. If I want the T to go away, I'm going to divide by T. Right? And what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Okay? And those P's and those T's cancel out. And you'll see very quickly that you're left with the R that you want by itself. So you rewrite your answer to say R equals capital I divided by P times T. Right? And that equation has been solved for R. And notice, once again, there were no numbers in this problem. You used your sense and knowledge of equation solving skills to get that answer. Right? Now let's throw in some numbers with some letters, and not in a formula that has real life connection, but just in an equation. Right? Notice that this equation has both x's and y's, so it's not solved for either one of them at the moment. We want to solve this one for the letter y. Right? Now this one's going to have a couple of steps to it because it's not nice and clean. Okay, we want to circle the y and get the y by itself eventually. Well, you don't ever move the number or letter connected directly to the letter. You want to move the other term that's on the same side. So we want to move this 12x over to the left side of the equal sign. And to move 12x, it's a positive 12x, we want to subtract 12x from both sides. Now don't line it up under the 13 because it's not a like term with the 13. All right, you only line them up when they're like terms together. So on the left hand side you now have negative 12x plus 13, they can't go together, equals negative 2y. Right? And you're getting one step closer to where you want to be, because if you notice, we still want the y to stay, right? But we need to get rid of the negative 2, and the negative 2 is connected to the y by multiplication. So in order to make this happen, we want to divide everything on every side by negative 2. So that includes the negative 12x divided by negative 2 and the 13 divided by negative 2. If you don't take them individually, it does affect your final answer because you won't simplify the way you need to. All right, so now we come over here and do some cleaning up because it's a little messy. Negative 12 divided by negative 2 is going to give you positive 6x. Positive 13 over negative 2 does not reduce, nor does it divide perfectly, so we leave this as negative 13 over 2, and all of that equals the letter y. As long as your letter y is by itself, it does not matter which way you write it. If it bugs you to have it written this way, rewrite it with the symmetric property saying y equals 6x minus 13 over 2. These are the same answers, and both will be counted as correct. Right? It just depends on your personal taste. Okay, so that one was a little different. Right? And we're going to work with that a whole lot more. Right? But it wasn't a formula, even though you were doing a specific variable. Right? So let's take another one that's not a formula. It's a little longer, a little bit more complex. Okay, this one also has x's and y's, but this time we're going to solve for the letter x. So find the letter x in your problem, circle it, and notice that that letter will always stay on that side, but everything else attached to it has to go away. Right? Well, just like our normal equation process says, we must distribute first. So we're going to distribute this -3. -3 times y is -3y. -3 times -2 is +6. Bring down the 4x in the front, and all of that equals 15 plus y. Okay? And keep circling the x because you want it to stay. It kind of gives you a visual of who to move. Right? So now we need to move one of the things, either the y or the number, it doesn't matter which one, to the other side of the equal sign because our goal is to keep the x on the left. So I'm going to move the 6 first. To get rid of +6, we want a -6. That is a like term to 15, so line it up under 15. Right? Constants line up under constants. Okay, so in your next step, you're going to have 4x minus 3y on the left equals 15 minus 6 is 9 plus y on the right. Okay? Keeping in mind that we want the x to stay, so now we have to get rid of the -3y, and to send it over the wall we have to do the opposite. So we're going to add 3y and make sure you line it up under its like term, okay, and cancel it off. So at the next step we're at 4x equals 9 plus 4y. So we're getting closer. We only got one more thing to do to it. Right? And you'll notice that here is your x. The last thing that's attached to it is the 4, so we want to make the 4 go away, and we will do that by dividing each little piece of the problem by the number 4. Right? That cancels out the 4's over on the left, and you're left with x equals, which is good because that's what we want. 9 over 4 does not divide, nor does it reduce, so 9/4 stays in the answer. But 4 divided by 4 does reduce or divide, and it just makes 1, so it's plus y. So this becomes your final answer to solving for the letter x. Okay, and if they asked us to solve for the letter y, we would do similar steps, but obviously our answer wouldn't say x equals. All right, going back to some formulas that you may or may not be familiar with from pre-algebra, but they were around. Okay. If we have v equals 2 pi r squared h, right, this is part of the volume formula, right, for a cylinder. Okay. We're going to solve it for the r. Okay, so first things first, identify where the r is, circle it. Okay, and then we need to look at who we need to get rid of. We need to get rid of the 2, the pi, the h, and eventually the squared part has to go away too. All right, so we're going to do one move first and get rid of all the division pieces. So all the numbers that are being multiplied, we want to divide to get rid of them. So we want to divide by the 2, the pi, and the h. And what we do on one side, you have to do on the other. So your 2, your pi, and your h are now gone. Okay, you cannot get rid of the squared at the same time because that's a separate operation. So at this step, you now have v divided by 2 pi h equals r squared. So you're still not finished because this r has got to be a single r, not a squared r. Right? So then we need to come over to your knowledge of how to undo squareds. And this may be something that you have forgotten, but you need to quickly bring it back to mind. Right? To undo a x squared, you're going to use the square root of x. Right? So basically the opposite of squaring something is square rooting it. So if I want this square root sign to go away, or sorry, the square sign to go away, I need to use the square root to make it happen. So I'm going to square root both sides and make sure it's a big one on the left because it's got to have everything else underneath it. And that square root sign cancels out that square. So now your final answer is going to say the square root of v divided by 2 pi h, all of that equals the letter r by itself. Right? So you only do that when the variable that you want to get by itself has the exponent of 2 attached to it. If it doesn't, you don't use the square root. Right? And the last example, right, is a formula we're all familiar with, E equals mc squared. And we want to practice solving that for the letter c. Right, so here's another example where if you circle your letter, you notice it has an exponent of 2 to it. So we're going to use that whole square root concept to help us out. Before we do any square rooting though, we have to get rid of the m. Right, so we want to divide by m on both sides, cancel them out. Okay, so your next step, you have e divided by m equals c squared. Okay, we want to make sure that we identify the letter we're circling. Okay, and to undo the square, you want to square root both sides. And you do have to show that you are canceling off that square. Right, that's part of your work to justify your answer. So we're going to have the square root of e divided by m, and all of that equals the letter c. Okay, so we'll do a lot more work with this in class with a lot different formulas, right, to get you more comfortable with it. This is a newer topic, right, so just take it one step at a time, show all your steps, and think through what you're doing, even though some of the problems may not have any numbers in them.